Let's take a closer look at some of those foreign policy decisions tabled at the two sessions in Beijing. China is embarking on a new diplomatic journey to spread its influence across the world. Here are the 5 main diplomacy points that China will focus on this year.
China will be in the spotlight again following the G20 summit in 2016. The wheels are already in motion for China's massive One Belt, One Road summit this May. The initiative aims to build a trade and infrastructure network connecting Asia with Europe and Africa along ancient Silk Road trade routes. The year 2017 will also test China's relationship with the United States, now under the rule of President Donald Trump. He first broke decades of protocol by taking a phone call from Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen, then accused China of stealing jobs from Americans.
China, that's great. Buy from China. Buy toys from China.
China says only by cooperating with each other can both countries hope to thrive. Closer to home, another hornet's nest is being stirred. Tensions in the Korean Peninsula are on the rise. The South Korean government has pushed through with the land swap deal with the multinational Lotte Group. The deal paves the way for the deployment of the THAAD anti-missile system in South Korea. Add that to the nuclear threat from the DPRK and the continuing political turmoil in the South, and the region has been more volatile than in any time in recent history. Leaders from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which together make up the so-called BRICS countries, will meet in September in southeast China's Xiamen City. The summit will focus on economic cooperation and a joint response to global challenges. Together, the 5 BRICS countries have accounted for half of the world's GDP in the past decade. Perhaps the most crucial issue China will need to navigate en route to better relations in the region is the South China Sea. China and the Philippines have repaired relations after the so-called South China Sea arbitration case, and more countries are realizing dialogue is the only way to harmony.
Let's discuss this further with international relations expert Professor Macharia Munene. Professor, thank you for joining us in studio today. How keen is Africa on the political discussions going on in Beijing, and what impact are they likely to have on the continent?
First of all, the world is going through a transition, and China is one of the 2 major powers on all counts: economic, politics, geopolitics, whatever you think about. China is a force. So it is in the interest of the African countries to observe and follow what is going on in China, what the thinking is, what the policies are likely to be, and how those policies might affect the African continent or the relationship with China as well as with other powers. So what we expect out of these discussions is to see the direction in which Chinese authorities are thinking about not only China itself, but the rest of the world, and Africa as a major component of that world. I suspect that they'll be talking more in terms of cooperation, filling in gaps where it appears as if the Europeans, the Euros, are having problems, serious problems, so they don't want to engage. They are clouding themselves inside. And so the alternative is to offer an inclusive way of dealing with the issues that come up, instead of being protectionist and self-locking, which appears to be going on. So there is this transition in the world as to which direction geopolitics will take place. The countries will look after their interest.
So how soon will it be up until when Africa starts to see results of the outcomes of the 2 sessions?
Well, I think first of all, there will be statements, which will be immediate, and the statements would be encouraging. After the statement, then for African countries also to figure out how to engage what China will be saying, because it is not a one-way traffic, it's 2-way. So China says wants one thing, the Africans want one thing, they meet, and the convergence point, they work out. And I think the relations will improve, there will be more interaction than probably there was.
All right, Professor Macharia Munene, great insights. Thank you very much for joining us. And we are staying, of course, on those developments in Beijing. Let's now cross to CGTN's Robert Nagila in Beijing for more details. Robert, what more can you tell us about this new wave of projects that China is planning in Africa?
Well, good afternoon, Peninsula. Well, basically, China is now moving into what I call phase 2. They've heavily invested in Africa. They've partnered with the African countries in terms of development and poverty alleviation. And now they want to. What they're doing is they want to use a different approach in how they approach this development project. For example, they normally go through governments to come up with financing for the project, but they want to now turn on to market-based investments, try and gather those investments from the markets themselves, the local markets and international ones, because they also believe that that will also give those African countries a foothold or a bigger say in some of those projects. But even bigger than that is they want to increase Africa's production capacity, something that has been lacking for a very, very long time. So what we're looking at is a whole totally different approach in this new phase in how they approach the financing and how these projects are done. They want to increase the production capacity of these countries, looking at the manufacturing sectors of a lot of these countries, because there's a new thinking here that, look, yes, we can give money and invest there, but it is even better and more beneficial for these countries if these countries are actually able to produce some of these goods on their own instead of depending on bringing some of these things from the outside. So a totally different shift. But China also says that it wants to increase the amount of investment it has in this African country. And it says that it can do this immediately, but it has so many projects going on in African countries, and what it wants is for these development projects that are ongoing at the moment to be hastened. It wants African countries to finish this project quickly so that they can move on to other projects, especially infrastructural projects, which will give them better access to markets, not just within the continent itself, but outside. So that's where we are at the moment, and it looks like the continent is now looking at a very, very exciting phase in this next, in terms of development, partnered, of course, with China.
All right, CGTN's Robert Nagila on the line from Beijing. Many thanks.